The DPRK is sitting on upwards of $10 trillion of critical elements, or CMs, hidden in its mountains. One especially large site, Zhongju, is estimated to have nearly 216.2 million tons of rare earth oxides, double the known world reserves, worth a staggering $2.8 trillion. According to a report from the Korea Resources Corporation, the DPRK may have access to 6 billion tons of magnesite, 5 billion tons of iron ore, 2 billion tons of graphite, and 250,000 tons of tungsten. Western experts outbid each other with fantastic estimations, and while the DPRK itself doesn't make such bombastic claims, it does boast about its bountiful CMs on the state website. These critical metals are absolutely necessary for many of the technologies and devices we use every day. If the claims of these reserves are accurate, it would send shockwaves through the global political status quo. The US and its allies are growing increasingly nervous about the possibility of a prosperous DPRK, and sitting on some of the largest rare earth deposits in the world is a one-way ticket to incredible wealth. In this video, we'll investigate North Korea's rare earth and mineral resources, consider Western capital's interest in them, and explore the geopolitical ramifications. And what if North Korea doesn't have these huge quantities of vital and profitable resources? Could something else be going on here? If you enjoy what we do, then don't forget to like the video, and check out our Patreon for exclusive content and early releases. The story of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK, began when a coalition of Red Army and Korean nationalist forces liberated Korea from Japanese domination. Later, the US would come to occupy what is today South Korea, including the 38th parallel. Naturally, the North created a provisional, democratic government in the image of the USSR, and appointed Kim Il-sung as its first prime minister. In stark contrast, the South was ruled by a US-friendly, anti-communist dictator named Syngman Rhee. For the sake of brevity, we'll skip most of the Korean War's horrific details. Suffice it to say that with China's help, the DPRK managed to hold off US forces until a truce was signed, creating the demilitarized zone we know today as the 38th parallel. Following the war, South Korea would be ruled by US-supervised military dictators until 1993. During this same period, the North made dramatic progress towards nationalizing industries, providing universal healthcare, and improving education. This would, of course, change with the loss of its greatest trading partner, the USSR, in the early 90s. While the US has attempted to disrupt North Korea's economy since the end of the war, the modern sanctions regime was only kicked off in 2006 with UN Security Council Resolution 1718, creatively titled the Democratic People's Republic of Korea Sanctions Committee, which would eventually make the DPRK the most sanctioned country on Earth. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk minerals. The DPRK is home to 220 types of mineral, of which 20 are economical, which means there's enough to extract for profitable export. In keeping with recent estimates, the North does seem to have some large deposits of certain key minerals such as coal, anthracite, and graphite. Coal is the DPRK's largest mineral export by far, accounting for approximately 15%. Other CMs make up a combined 15% of exports. Overall, the DPRK's heavy industry is mostly involved in the initial stages of production, electric power metallurgy, building machines, and chemical research. Mining operations have limited access to investment funds, and any deals made are shrouded in secrecy thanks to the US sanctions regime. The DPRK claims that their economy gives preference to heavy industry owing to their, quote, position and role in the country's specific conditions. Those conditions being that the DPRK is perpetually forced to be on a so-called war footing due to the aggressive military stance of the US. In fact, this is a stated tactic of the US plan to destabilize the DPRK. A combination of forcing the North to spend unsustainably on defense while isolating the country economically. But let's focus on those critical metals, more specifically rare earth elements, since those are the most highly sought after. There are 17 rare earth metals on the CM list, so we'll highlight just a few: neodymium, erbium, and yttrium. Due to their exceptional electromagnetic properties, they are fundamental to nearly all modern tech. Electric vehicles, semiconductors, smart bombs, lasers for tanks or missile systems, and radar. Given some of the tech on that list, it should be pretty clear that the US and Western capital in general would be highly interested in possessing a large, untapped quantity of CMs in the DPRK's territory. Of course, the United States doesn't only view the DPRK as valuable because of its vast stores of CMs the US desperately needs. It's also related to the reason the US maintains South Korea as a vassal state. The strategic position the peninsula occupies on the border with China means that a US-friendly regime there would provide the US opportunities to severely disrupt Chinese industry in the region, including first strike capabilities on nearly all of China's mega industries. However, a more pressing issue for US capital is that it's barred from doing business in the DPRK, meaning that US companies won't be able to exploit this vast resource wealth, as we've seen them do from Africa to Latin America thanks to puppet regimes friendly to US interests. To make matters worse for American capital, the US is scared by the fact that China, the DPRK's largest and closest trading partner, will be able to further solidify their near total control of the rare earth metal trade, currently providing 85% of the world's supply. Interestingly, the same sources making the claim that these resources exist also have a more sensible way forward to mend relations with the DPRK by first recognizing their status as a nuclear power, similar to India and Pakistan, and then to use that as a springboard for further diplomatic relations. While this sounds great for the DPRK, since $10 trillion worth of high-demand CMs would be a major boost for the country, it's also not based on concrete evidence. Much of the data is questionable, motivated speculation on the part of Western or Western-backed players. A 2023 study published by the journal International Geology Review examined sites claimed to hold large, almost absurd quantities of various CMs. The study's conclusion didn't mince words, saying, quote, "The geological investigation so far shows limited evidence for the claims of huge quantities of economically viable CM ore deposits. That isn't to say that the DPRK is devoid of CMs, but that the quantity and quality of available ore is likely lower than estimated." That prompts the question, why would political forces in the West make these claims about the DPRK? Given their historical desire to dominate the peninsula, it's safe to assume that it's likely an excuse for Western capital to push for an end to the sanctions regime so that they can begin exploiting it themselves, while allowing the US to save face instead of admitting it lost this decades-long war against the DPRK. The US already has a very aggressive military stance against the North in coalition with South Korea and Japan. A nuclear war wouldn't be good for business, especially the extraction industry. So it would appear that instead of phantom WMDs, Western business leaders want to chase phantom CMs. Whatever their real plans, the sovereignty of the Korean peninsula is none of their concern. A unified Korea is a laudable goal, one shared by Koreans both north and south of the DMZ. But that unification cannot be coerced or forced by outside powers. The people of the DPRK suffer acutely under the sanctions imposed on their country. Ostensibly done to weaken the government, these sanctions amount to a form of collective punishment which is supposedly illegal under international law. But as the US and Israeli reaction to the ICJ's ruling has shown, that doesn't seem to matter. The United States will continue to use South Korea as a pawn to project power in the region regardless of what international law demands. Tensions between the DPRK and Western regimes will likely not ease anytime soon, despite the greed-fueled thaw led by invested industries wanting to exploit the DPRK's resources. Because of the sanctions regime, no one can make definitive statements about the economics and available resources of the DPRK, as the aforementioned study also concludes. The sanctions make any potential trade-based end to this conflict very costly, if not outright illegal. The DPRK's limited choice of trade partners creates for the North a no-win situation where they're forced to do business with countries that are also under the harsh US sanctions regime, and thus are further vilified as supporting whatever policy the US is punishing these other countries for. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a shortage of semiconductors due to a shortage of rare earth elements necessary for their production and functioning. In fact, it was during the pandemic that some of the more outlandish claims about the CM resources in the DPRK were made. Rare earth elements are difficult to recycle, which for now means that mining new ore is still the most cost-effective solution. However, given this difficulty of recycling, we can consider these CMs to be non-renewable, and thus conflict over reserves will continue to flare up and become ever more deadly. Even if the DPRK's resources are more modest than claimed, their relationship and trade with China is a constant source of angst for the US. The uneasy military détente between the DPRK and the US will likely continue to escalate. The North will continue testing nuclear-capable missiles near Japan and South Korea so long as the US and the South continue the provocative yearly joint military drills. What's more, the DPRK's proximity to China makes it a strategic target in a theoretical US-China conflict, since the border area between China and the DPRK is relatively close to major Chinese industrial production centers. As a result, this small country hoping to ensure its independence will continue to be threatened by larger economic factors outside its control. As long as capital is allowed to remain the dominant global driver, there will be no peace in the region or in the rest of the world. These analysis episodes are only possible thanks to our generous patrons. As a little thank you for your support, all patrons get early access to analysis episodes, as well as an audio version of the news. If you'd like to help support the show, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/firstthought. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.